Hi, I'm Councillor Tom Hathway. I'm a Green Councillor on Bristol City Council. So this week we voted on a joint Labour Green motion on the private rented sector in the city. The motion called for a number of things. It got the council to formally support the introduction of rent controls. It got the council to recognise the creep of bidding wars into the private rented sector in the city, to commit to enforcing against unlawful Section 21 eviction notices that have been served. And it also included some concrete actions that we can take as a city today to improve the lot for tenants in the city, through reviewing our enforcement policy, through publishing an index of what living rents would be for properties in Bristol. Yeah, so it was a bit of a difficult motion for me. I was the seconder of the motion, along with the Labour cabinet member for housing, who put the motion forward. Um, to explain that a little bit, Labour brought forward a motion on the private rented sector to full council, and before the meeting, in the week before, myself and a couple of other Greens approached the proposer, Labour's Tom Renard, and invited him to work with us on an altered motion. So as Greens, we wanted to see more recognition that key workers are directly affected by the rental crisis in Bristol, and we wanted to see concrete actions built into the motion that we could take as a council right now to raise standards and to to start the work of getting the living rent figures out there. So we approached Labour. They agreed to work with us and accepted some of the alterations that we wanted to make to their motion. There was a process of getting that altered motion into the agenda, which went fairly smoothly. However, in the background to all that, there was an issue raised in that the council's legal officer felt that the legislation that's in place to prevent corruption in public office would mean that us as tenants and landlords wouldn't be able to take part in the debate. So lots of frantic running around in the run up to the debate to see whether we could argue about the interpretation of that legislation, and the officer was very clear that their interpretation would stand. And the second point was whether we could get a dispensation to take part in the debate. What that process revealed was that there's a gap in how we do things in Bristol, which meant that we weren't able to apply for an urgent or emergency dispensation. So unfortunately, landlords and tenants like myself were excluded from the debate. Thankfully, Carla, my co-councillor, my co-Green councillor in Clifton Down, was able to speak on my behalf as a resident in her ward, so was able to deliver the speech that I intended to second that motion. There was some good debate in the chamber. There was a widespread support, and I'm pleased that the Tories were the only party to vote against the interest of tenants in the city. Yeah, so I think as Greens, one of the things we've been really good at demonstrating is that we're happy to work cross-party, and we do it really well. This isn't the first cross-party motion that we've brought to the council chamber and has got passed, and it certainly won't be the last. With Tom, we work closely already. He set up the Living Rent Commission, which brings together representatives from across the city, from groups like Shelter for representing landlords, from Black Southwest Network and things like that. So we've been part of that commission as well. We've been observing closely and feeding into that process. So for us, it was kind of pushing at an open door. It was a motion that we already supported but wanted to take further. And the actions we proposed, I think, Tom was quite open to accepting as well. So yeah, it was good. Yeah, so I mean, the motion that we presented was around broad support for the principles of rent controls, about recognizing that the cost of renting in the city has been allowed to spiral since Thatcher's deregulation in the late 80s, and that there needs to be intervention to stop that from happening. It didn't prescribe a particular way of doing that, and there are lots of different ways that can be done, as evidenced, right across Europe and the wider world. There are many different cities using rent controls, and some of them act in different ways. You can link rent to a tenant's income, for example. You can say that there are a set of criteria, and based on how your property performs to those criteria, that is how you can set the level of rent. There are limits to how much you can raise the rent or how frequently you can raise the rent. And the Council's Living Rent Commission for the past few months have really been doing a deep dive on how rent controls already work in different places, and really discussing and pulling those apart and thinking about how those might work in Bristol or whether they wouldn't work. And we're hoping to see a report in February next month, summarising the work of the Commission, and hopefully that will include a strong indication of what kind of controls people would want in Bristol and how they might work as well. So the Living Rent Commission, the work that it's done will obviously be presented to us as a council, but it will also be fed to the Department for Housing and Levelling Up Communities. So that's Michael Gove's department. The Tories, up until this point, have been pretty clear that they don't like intervening in the free market, and they're quite happy to, watch things broadly spiral out of control. So is it likely to be implemented under a Tory government? No, but I think it's really important that we get the ball rolling. Even they will have a limit where they recognise, the people that the free market is dependent upon squeezing will reach a point where they can be squeezed no more, and something will have to change. And we've all got our fingers crossed that at the next general election there will be a change in leadership, and that really opens up the possibility for devolving rent control powers, as they have done in Scotland. And it's important for us to have these foundations to build upon when that time comes. Yeah, well, I think it's important to make note of the fairer private rented sector bill, which is working its way through Parliament, which is actually a good bit of legislation. And you're right that we can't take rent controls as the be all and end all. Rent controls are one part of quite a complex housing market and quite a complex rented sector. The rent controls control the price, but you're right, they don't impact the standards necessarily. So what we want to see and what we're expecting from the Fairer Private Rented Sector Bill is a ban to Section 21 evictions, which is the right for a landlord to evict a tenant at any time through no fault, or so-called no fault evictions. So controlling the rate of rent increase and making sure that tenants are secure in their properties go hand in hand, really. And then the other thing that we can do locally, and one thing which we will be seeking to do locally and certainly pushing the administration to do, is to implement citywide licensing. That's something we can already do in Bristol. We have to apply to the government to do it, but it's a really useful tool in driving up standards. So at the moment, the vast majority of rented properties in Bristol, not only can you be kicked out at any time through no fault of your own, not only can the rents go up at a totally uncontrolled rate, we don't really know who's in there, how much they're paying, or who the landlord is. We don't have a licensing scheme for the vast majority of rentals in Bristol. So that's one thing we can do now, whilst we wait for the government to catch up with countries like Scotland on devolving those rent control powers.